but
At church camp?
what?
I have no idea what you mean.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was really nice to be out there though. I genuinely, with everything going on here and all the uncertainty and stress and everything, and then getting to go to this place that I very much consider where I genuinely fell in love with Jesus was at Glen Lake. It was where I learned how to be a worship leader at Glen Lake. I have probably played more music than any individual on this planet in that chapel because I've been doing it for so many years.
Yeah.
And it just still, every time it's still just as meaningful, which is cool. That's dope.
Yeah. Welcome to Sunday Plus. We are talking about John's experience at church camp back this weekend. Where he got to go be a guest worship leader out at Glen Lake. What is it? Camp Retreat Center?
Glen Lake Camp and Retreat Center in Glen Rose, Texas.
Glen Rose, Texas. Home of dinosaurs, fossils, big rocks. There is a real...
The Promise was out in Glen Rose.
There's also...
Did you ever go see that?
I saw that. Yeah, I saw The Promise back when I was a kid, I think. We went out there. Our church took a trip out there and... but I remember we took the kids to the dinosaur park. Yeah. And there was some restaurant we ate at afterward that was like a barbecue restaurant.
Hammond's.
I think so, yeah. It was pretty good.
You go to if you're in Glen Rose, you go to Hammond's.
Okay.
You gotta get the corn fritters, and then virtually anything on their barbecue is just it's.
What I think is awesome is that every town that has like a church camp in it has like one spot you have to go to. Yeah. So I worked at a what is called Camp Ozark in Mount Ida, Arkansas for a summer in college, and non-denominational, aka Baptist camp. And but there was a place called the Dairyette, and it was like a better version of Dairy Queen. But this trying not to throw shade here, but that's not a far stretch. It's not hard to beat out Dairy Queen. Yeah, but it was one of those places of like Hot Springs is literally 20 minutes away.
I love Hot Springs.
It's a great place, great food, great things to do, and everybody would just stop at the Dairyette on their way on their day off. It was every church camp town has its own little place.
Man, so being out yesterday, and then I was watching the live stream. Well, I got stuck in traffic in Fort Worth because there was this insane wreck on the road, so it added like 45 minutes to my drive. But yeah, it was nice to kind of watch it and listen. But it was to a point though where it was bumper to bumper and we're just sitting. So I actually was kind of watching it. I just set it up on my dash and I was like, I'm just gonna watch it like this. And
this is what they had in Teslas for a while is you could actually like use the internet or stream or something. Like there were games on the dash for the passenger to play, and people were getting wrecked. The problem is some people can do that and not be distracted, and other people would just immediately go and then immediately get in a wreck. Right, absolutely. It's a terrible idea. Elon, stop it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, there's also those things that you can like hijack your screen and then play YouTube from it, which I'm like, that's not the smartest thing I've ever heard of, but okay.
This is, when we talk about original sin, it might as well just be like...
I like that that's where you took it.
Yeah, well, we talk about original sin, and people don't want to talk about like the sinful nature of humanity, so we'll just say that sometimes we make really poor decisions, like the opportunity to watch YouTube while you should be driving.
Every once in a while.
Yeah, every once in a while.
Okay, so you made a comment, and while I was on 35 West, sitting in traffic, I'm taking notes like I normally do while I'm in the building. I wrote down modern miracles because you made a reference to something about what miracles look like, and I started thinking, what is a miracle? What was the reference that you brought up? Like this is kind of a miracle.
Well, there was a couple of them. There was
the first one.
The first one was just even looking at the ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it's like, wow, that's a miracle that this is so vast and beautiful and whatnot. But it started making me think like, okay, what would I legitimately, unironically say that's a miracle?
Yeah.
So what is a modern miracle to David?
So a modern miracle, like a unexplainable. So yesterday we had somebody who was walking out of traditional worship, and his wife has had like 11 cardiovascular surgeries.
Oh my gosh.
And over the last, I think, 18 years. And she just had another 3 stents put in so that the blood can flow really well and she can continue to be vibrant, and avoid the bypass surgery. But then he was talking about how they went to the hospital at like 6 a.m, had surgery at 8, and they were out by 2. And this is like a major cardiovascular project. And I thought, well, that kind of thing used to be in the hospital for days afterward. Yeah. And it's like, well, they just go in through the wrist and they work their little machines up and they put the stents in and then they're out and there's like not as much healing time. And so for me, like, obviously there's a scientific, like, they studied the cardiovascular system. They know the structure of veins where in arteries they can go in and do that. But it like took my breath away that someone would have that imagination. So I think that a modern day miracle for me isn't always something about like, I survived a car crash when I shouldn't have, or money just showed up in my bank account randomly. It just seems like these things.
That miracle.
I mean, that would be great, right? Yeah. It just seems like those moments when I literally cannot believe that just happened. And I think that, there's this, I always lend on the scientific side, like the person who designed the animatronic suits so that people who have paralysis can walk again is just nuts to think about.
Yeah.
But I think from an artistic side, there's a lot that takes our breath away. That's just like, I can't imagine, like, when I take a guitar, I can't do what you do. And I get up there and I'm like, okay, I think this sounds okay. And then I see like what you can do, and then putting the other pieces of the band around it. There are just times in which I'm looking at y'all thinking, this is amazing. I mean, this is just, it takes my breath away. So I just think a miracle, by definition, is something that just literally not supposed to happen.
I like the way that that's not supposed to happen. So I like that.
Instead of impossible, I think improbable. And, it seems natural for a band to get together because we've seen bands all the time. Yeah. But we've also seen bands break up all the time.
Oh, yeah, you talked about the Foo Fighters thing.
Yeah, the Foo Fighters. Oh, my gosh. I need to post that.
By the way, I did look it up because I was still in traffic when I finished the worship service. So I watched it, and I was like, that's a lot of people.
It's amazing. They started doing it. They have another one in like Berlin where they do Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana.
I've seen that. That one I had seen before. And there's even more people at that one.
Yeah.
That one was wild.
It's like a stadium full. It's like where Bayern Munich played. Or no, that's Berlin. I can't remember. It's the Berlin Olympic Stadium or something. They fill it up with musicians.
So on that note, you said something in the I believe it was in the story of the where you were taking the kids down to see the ocean, and you said a phrase that I latched onto immediately. Experience something bigger than you to make you feel small.
Yeah.
I thought that was so profound, like intentionally trying to make yourself feel small so that you realize how, in some ways, yes, how insignificant you are. Right. It changes your perspective on things. I mean, the most obvious answer or example of that would be going to the Grand Canyon.
Right.
For me.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So we went a few years ago. My wife had never been. And so we're like, well, let's road trip this thing. And so my wife and I and 2 of our best friends hopped in my car, and I just drove straight to Arizona.
Did you go to the South Rim?
Yes. Yeah. We stayed in Flagstaff, which is a little over, it's about an hour away, which Flagstaff also... super cool place to be.
Never been there.
Flagstaff is a city that punches way above its weight.
Cool.
It's a cool place. Anyway, so we go there, and I had been a couple of times when I was younger, but as an adult, I go and I'm like, the best way I could describe it, it's like if your eyes are on drugs.
Yeah.
Because you're just like wide-eyed and you can't stop looking at it, and there's just so much information to try and take in, and it doesn't feel real.
Yeah.
It's so massive, and you're like, how is this really a thing?
Right.
And it's also one of those things where America rarely has like the biggest or most of anything. Like our mountains, they're fine. But you go to the
Go to like the Alps or something.
You go to the Alps, you go to the Himalayas, like that's where it's like, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. And the Rockies are beautiful.
Yeah, they're awesome, yeah.
But there is nothing anywhere close to the Grand Canyon.
Right, yeah.
It's like the second biggest canyon in the world isn't even half of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
It's just insane. But yeah, so that phrase, experience something big to make you feel small.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this, we walk around all day, and what do we generally focus on? We focus on the stimulus that we experience, the emotions we experience, our problems, our worries. Everything's very, centric around ourselves, and that's survivalist, and it's, not necessarily a bad thing, but those moments in which, and I think that part of experiencing something larger than yourself is just therapeutic in nature. That's why so many people love going to the beach or the Grand Canyon or a national park is it doesn't make you feel small in a bad way. It makes you feel small in a way in which you say, oh, maybe like there's pressure off of me. I'm not the only thing. There is something larger. And so all of these worries and all these things that are compounding upon me that I feel like the entire weight of the world is on my shoulders, well, that's impossible if there's something so much larger than me out there. And that's where I think people find such peace in the vastness. If I don't know the answer and I don't know what's out there, then there's something larger than me too. I think it's a spiritual experience. But I think the beautiful thing of becoming smaller in that vastness is, I think one, it can give you peace that helps you recognize that, okay, maybe your problems or your worries aren't the only thing going on in life. I also think
it does diminish them a little bit. I absolutely feel that.
I think it does diminish them. I think it makes you more willing to be part of it. So I'll use the example of a soccer team. And if you've got one person, and I'll just go ahead and pick on Cristiano Ronaldo because he often tries to take over the game himself. You got one, let's go. I mean, you could go basketball and you could say Kobe, or one guy who wants to take over the entire thing by himself, or one woman. And if you've got 1 on 11, it really doesn't work very well. Or 1 on 5, it doesn't really work very well. So if you're trying to take on all of this life, but when you humble yourself and you say, okay, I'm going to pull my role in my team. And then you've got, Barcelona of the early 2000s, or you've got, even when Shaq and Kobe teamed up and you had the other Derek Fisher and all the other people around him on the Lakers, right? All of a sudden you start winning championships because you play your part instead of trying to carry the entire thing on your shoulders. So I think putting ourselves in places that make us feel small end up making us better human beings.
So what you're saying is in June, you're going to go to the Grand Canyon.
That's right. Yeah. In June, I'm going to go to the Grand Canyon.
I absolutely love that. It's such a consistent thing that any human being with a set of eyes can go to a place like that, stand at the foot of a mountain, stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and look out at how small you are, and but it's never felt like a bad thing.
No, not at all. I think the
perspective,
the beauty of it is it never gets old either.
It does not. I said that so many times after this last trip, which was 3 years ago now, that you could just stare at it from the same vantage point, and it never got old. I'm like, I could just stare at this all day, and I don't want to blink because it's just so much. It's absolutely wild.
I will say a great spiritual practice if anybody wants something very simple, and it's really hard to do in the DFW Metroplex with all of our lights. But if you take about 30 seconds to a minute every night and just look up at stars, there is this kind of natural feeling that comes over you that actually helps you become a better person.
I absolutely love doing that. And on clear nights, my wife will tell you, I will step out in our front yard. Well, I'll actually walk out into the street and I'll just look up at the stars, especially lately because the planets have been aligned. And so they're all out at the same time, which is really cool. And to just kind of soak that in. But anytime I ever go hiking, particularly in New Mexico, where we are, we're over an hour away from Santa Fe, and there's nothing competing with the stars, and on a clear night you just see everything.
Right. Well, you want to feel small. Do you remember the first time you ever saw something really bright and then someone told you it was like Venus? You're like, I'm staring at another planet right now.
Yeah.
That is wild.
I love Venus is often the brightest one because it's the closest to our planet, but and lately it's been crazy bright. Like even on cloudy nights, it's shining through the clouds, which that's insane.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. So I want to shift to scripture that you were referencing, and I thought this was kind of a profound concept that was discussed, and you kind of closed out the sermon on it, but the phrase, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And I found that to be an interesting way to look at things, because you have the famous doubting Thomas, unless I put my hands in the holes in your hands, I will not believe. But I find it interesting that it didn't feel like Jesus was rebuking people. He was just kind of stating the fact that, if they don't see anything, they're not really going to believe. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because often faith is predicated on, you're not supposed to see anything, you just have to believe. And yet here it's talking about, no. If you don't see anything, you're not going to believe. And so you have to be able to feel and experience something.
Yeah, I struggled with that line because I think I'd always read it or heard it as a derogatory statement. Jesus would be like, oh my gosh, you guys have always got... And I think I've even preached that before because I'd always heard it and I always read it as this, like, you guys are hopeless. You've got to have these signs and wonders, and why can't you just believe? And I was reading it over and over again. I was like, yeah, but this is why. I mean, the Gospel of John, literally, he includes these things so that people will believe. And Jesus did these miracles so that we believe. And then we've ultimately got this sign of resurrection to enforce it. And I struggled a lot with people who have been praying for a miracle. And like this, just, if God is doing this for these people in Scripture, why is, God not doing it for me now? And I really, really, really struggled with that. But then I thought about this conception, like we talked about, this conception of miracle, or this conception of experience. And one of the reasons why I'm so, and I know you are too, so passionate about worship being a really great experience is because I do think people need like anchor points of awe and wonder and signs. And so if I put myself, it's just amazing to me that Christianity is still around, because for so long preachers were just like, John Wesley he would lay out logical arguments, like no emotion whatsoever. And apparently he was a great preacher, but so it was all logic and it was all very formulaic. And I guess it was just what you did until people started asking questions about that. So while I don't think that everything has to be a Pentecostal revival all the time, to expect people to show up and say, you know what, I'm going to put myself in this place and walk away feeling nothing, right? Or just like have an argument presented to them. You have to have something that you experience that makes you have that same sense of awe of looking at the stars, or some kind of feeling about it, because I don't think God is a stoic God. I think God is a God who enters into our lives, and our lives are full of emotions and feelings. So yeah, I think the signs and the wonders are often either the way that we serve and we are a sign and wonder, or the way that we are served, or the emotion we have during worship. I think it's important to put ourselves in position to experience great things. That's why like going to church camp, right, is a great experience, or going on a mission trip, or doing those moments that get us out of the daily routine, because it's just really easy to not see a sign and wonder and not believe.
I've often said in conversations with somebody who has no belief system whatsoever, they think everything is just chance. They're like passive atheists, not active atheists.
Kind of nihilist, like nothing really matters.
Yeah. And I've met a lot more passive atheists than active ones. I've met like 2 people who were like staunch atheists and like, "Ugh," and they're like throwing it at your face, like Richard Dawkins style. And I'm just like, oh, wow.
Chill out, dude.
You're a lot. But one of the things that I've often pointed to is that our emotions are singularly so complex. And yet when you are experiencing them, whether you're watching a movie and there's a particularly captivating moment and you start crying and you're just filled with this emotion, or you're in worship, or you're watching your child accomplish something and you're feeling that, it's those moments for me that I'm like, there's no way this is meaningless.
Yeah.
It's impossible because these emotions are so complex and so profound in these moments, to the point that it's feeling those emotions that helps like land that core memory that just sits. And I've very often pointed to the complexity of our emotions, to the fact that there's no way this is all chance.
Right. Yeah.
It's impossible.
I think it was a pastor up in Kansas City named Tim Keel, I think was the guy who, one of the ways, I guess there's an atonement theory called recapitulation, where
I've heard of that.
It's not like atonement theory where Jesus dies to pay a price. Recapitulation incorporates the incarnation into salvation. So Jesus lives every part of human life from birth to death, individual human life at least, and with community and with friends, and redeems it all along the way. And so he talks about the experiences we have of God, the emotions we have of God, whether it is happiness or sadness or anger or whatever, that Jesus has lived all of those things, and this is what makes us fully human. So Jesus's recapitulation of life is the fullest amount of human you can be, and it helps us to be the fullest human that God created us to be by following Jesus and being saved by Jesus. And our emotions are connectivity points in that. So as a spiritual discipline standpoint, when we are mad or sad or angry, if we can focus in on why and how we feel, we can also experience where Christ is in that moment, and redeem those moments. And so we can be angry, but we can be righteously angry when there's suffering or indignation in the world. When we're sad, we can, because I think about, people talk about miracles in hospitals, and it's only when someone miraculously comes back to life.
Sure. But then you can get somebody who's very glass half empty and like, what about all the other people?
Well, and so there was a moment when I first started as an associate at Stonebridge over in McKinney, literally third day I'm ever there, this woman's walking down the hall and she goes, "Oh, Pastor David, I'm so glad I ran into you. My mom is basically on hospice and we've been praying for recovery, but would you come pray with her, please?" And I think she's probably going to go. And I'm just like, okay, I have no idea who you are. I don't know your mom, but let's go figure I'm supposed to do this. So at that point, I go into the hospice center, and it's very clear that like we're not praying for a miracle anymore. And so I go in there, and I'm young, I'm a hot shot, and I just pray all of these grandiose big prayers over her, which doesn't take that long.
No.
And I'm thinking, so I'm there, I'm praying, and I'm like, okay, I guess am I supposed to sit here? I guess I'll get to know this woman. I don't want to just shortchange her. I want to make her feel like she's valuable and her mom's valuable. So after about 30 minutes, we'd prayed a couple of times, we'd visited, and it was clear we were not going any farther. So I just said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's say the Lord's Prayer together, and then I'm going to go ahead and head out. And why don't you let me know how you're doing later. Gave her my phone number. And so we hold hands and just kind of put our hands on her mom, who's hasn't been conscious in like literally 3 or 4 days. And as we're praying, you start to hear these breath sounds, and you watch her mouth, and she is literally moving her mouth along with the Lord's Prayer. And about 2 hours later passes away. And it was just this moment of,
oh my.
I mean, it was literally a miracle. I mean, it was one of those moments that I still get goosebumps talking about, in that it was sad. It was heartbreaking, but at the same time, it was beautiful. And it gave, her name was Kristen, Kristen a lot of peace. So the miracle wasn't that her mom all of a sudden came back to life and lived for another 100 years. The miracle is that God was with her as she died. And that's something that is beautiful in and of itself, and that we don't even go through death alone. That God ushers us through this whole experience into the eternal life. And so I think even in sadness, we can experience the beauty and the miraculous nature of God.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll just put a pin in it there.
Yeah, not gonna get much better than that. That's incredible. Wow,
it's really amazing.
I've never heard you tell that story. That's extraordinary.
If you want to hear another one, we were in a hospital room with a guy who was just really, really suffering. This was at Creekwood, and really, really suffering. Guy's name was Jeff, and the whole class is gathered around him, and for whatever reason, someone started singing Amazing Grace. And as we're singing Amazing Grace, I mean, this guy's been wheezing, and then all of a sudden he just starts singing. And then he goes back to wheezing and passes away the same day. And it was like no reason that he should have been able to sing with us. And it wasn't very loud, but there was literally no reason. And I think part of it was Jeff's just amazing faith. But it was this really surreal moment in which it was heartbreaking. And at the same time it was heartbreaking, it was also like incredibly uplifting. It's just kind of that mix of emotions that exist within us that we're allowed to feel at the same time.
That I think that absolutely qualifies as a miracle.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Whew.
Being a pastor gives you the front row seat to a lot of amazing moments, I will say. People trust you in their most vulnerable spots, and it is a privilege to be able to do this.
I've been in places like that, but those are some experiences you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. And yeah, that's very cool. That's so cool. Yeah. It's sad, but it's to be able to have that moment where you're like, wow, is this really happening?
Yeah.
Well, episode 8.
Episode 8.
Appreciate you for sticking around.
Thanks for joining us.
Peace.